Good morning, one and all. Let us start the function with a prayer. Let me invite Anna, first year PG, for the prayer.
Thank you, Agila. വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമിന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ അനുദിനം തവ ഭാവമെന്നിൽ വിളങ്ങിടാൻ കൃപയേകിടൂ വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമെന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ അനുദിനം തവ ഭാവമെന്നിൽ വിളങ്ങിടാൻ കൃപയേകിടൂ ദിനം ദിനം ഞാൻ ദൈവമേ മറന്നുപോയി നിന്ദാനങ്ങൾ സ്വാശ്രയത്തിൻ നിഖിളിയായി സ്നേഹവാനെ ക്ഷമിക്കണേ ദിനം ദിനം ഞാൻ ദൈവമേ മറന്നുപോയി നിന്ദാനങ്ങൾ സ്വാശ്രയത്തിൻ നിഖിളിയായി സ്നേഹവാനെ ക്ഷമിക്കണേ വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമെന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ അനുദിനം തവ ഭാവമെന്നിൽ വിളങ്ങിടാൻ കൃപയേകിടൂ വിനയമുള്ളൊരു ഹൃദയമെന്നിൽ മെനഞ്ഞിടേണമേ ദൈവമേ.
Thank you, Anna. The more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you will go. The English department of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College, in association with the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of College, is conducting a series of lectures titled LITmus Talks. The inaugural talk was conducted by noted critic and writer Sri Sajay K, who talked about reflection on literature, which gave so many thought-provoking ideas, and it was a wonderful session. Today, we are honored to have our former head of our department, Dr. Anitha Ramesh K, who have very graciously accepted our invitation to be a part of our webinar series as a resource person for the second talk of the series on the topic, Act of Reading, a brief sketch. We are so happy to have you, ma'am. The essence of great leadership is influence and not authority. With this note, I would like to welcome the respected head of the department, Dr. Rekha K, to deliver the welcome speech. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kila. Good morning and welcome all. We have moved on to the second in the series of Litmus Talks. As we all know, for the first of the series, which was the inauguration of Litmus Talks, we had as resource person Sajay Sir of Government College Madapalli, who is a well-known writer. Now we have gathered here to listen to Dr. Anitha Ramesh K, who is about to illuminate new paths and acts of reading. She needs no introduction, as nearly all who are listening know her as a productive academician who has put in around 30 odd years of service in the department. She has served as former head and IQAC coordinator, who never compromised on quality education and service among the students and faculty. And I also realize how our fresh team of young teachers of this department can use this opportunity to meet and exchange views with her, who is a seasoned academician. I also use this opportunity to extend my gratitude to Dr. Anitha, who initiated me onto the path of doctoral studies. As a note of formality alone, as it is inevitable, I welcome you, ma'am, on behalf of the department. I also welcome Dr. Rajesh from the Department of Botany, the IQAC coordinator of our college, whose support and enthusiasm has made this meet possible. I welcome all you eager participants who are waiting here to hear from Dr. Anitha and also our students from the department. And over and above all this, the alumni of the department who have been tutored with love by her to this gathering. I welcome the faculty and students from other departments and from other colleges who have already enriched this gathering. Welcome one and all to this special forenoon. Welcome all.
Thank you so much, Rekha ma'am. Now let me graciously extend my gratitude to our beloved principal, also the former HOD of English Department, Dr. Rajani V, who have already presided for the inaugural function of LITmus Talk. Now, before we move on to the main event, I would like to call upon Kavya R from first year PG English to introduce the resource person for the day. Over to you, Kavya. Kavya, mic.
Respected dignitaries in the platform, teachers, and all my dear friends, a very warm good morning to one and all. Today, I'm here before you with a lot of excitement and gratitude for having been blessed with a special person for our session today. I sincerely express my gratitude to the Department of English and to the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of the college who have organized this session. No exaggerations, but to have someone like our keynote speaker, Dr. Anitha Ramesh, is nothing less than a privilege. And it's my pleasure and honor to introduce the resource person for the day, Dr. Anitha Ramesh K, a well known academician and someone who is a veteran for certain in the field of literary studies with more than long 30 years of experience and expertise. She was the former HOD of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College and is now working as a faculty in Malabar Christian College. She is the faculty and also an integral part of the educational institutions Crest and Demals, where she has extended a strong support system, creating a great learning environment for students by training and mentoring them. She is the chairperson of the academic committee of both BA and MA English and also a supervisor for self-learning materials of Sri Narayana Guru Open University. She has presented several papers in various national and international seminars and had published a number of articles in several research journals, which are all a true reflections of a ceaseless wealth of knowledge. Her student community can't be more proud of her, for she acts as a sweeping influence in the way she has actively and enthusiastically dealt with the academics. And the students of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College has a million stories about their former HOD, their favorite teacher, Anitha ma'am, who has infused into them the elements of a persistent vibrance and determination. Being heard so much about her, I'm super excited to listen to her today. And without further ado, I welcome Anitha ma'am for the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kavya.
Yeah, so thank you for those flattering words from everyone. Um, good morning, everyone. Um, Arya, I think, is the coordinator, Rekha, Ganga, and all the other teachers in the department were here. My former students, I saw a few of them, and the students of this of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College. Um, hello to everyone. I'm grateful to the college for inviting me. Okay, Rajesh is also there. We have Rajesh and I have worked together in the IQAC, and he was a strong support for me when I was in charge of the IQAC. Hello to Rajesh also. I'm so gratified that you have invited me today for this talk, because it's like a homecoming for me, coming back, even though it is only virtually, coming back to the institution where I served for around 32 years. Even though I miss the on-site, presence, the beautiful campus where we have, spent memorable days as teachers, with all the festivities going on, and a lot of bonding which has taken place in those times. And those are memories which I carry with me all the time, especially in these COVID times when you're sitting at home like a recluse. I think this is the first time I'm addressing the public, except for the students um, where I teach. I don't have any contact with the outside world except through telephone calls to my friends and family. So this is, a recluse coming out of the cloister, so to speak. So, and I was a little nervous also because it's a long time since I did this. And when you are taking online classes, the video is off, only the audio is on. You are all fragmented in this virtual world. Even a little bit of me on Instagram, a little bit of me on Facebook, a little bit of me on WhatsApp. I'm totally fragmented. And that is what identities are in these times, all fragmented and, all on show. We just put up our photographs or images of things we like or people we know on the internet, and we get a lot of gratification from that. So moving from there, and the COVID times has made us look at things very differently. We in fact, there is a total sea change in the way in which I don't know about the youngsters, but when I talk to my friends in the department or my other friends, we keep discussing about how our perception of things have changed so much since these COVID times. We are reading things differently. We are looking at, in a long-term manner, at this kind of imprisonment that we have been subjected to, house arrest or whatever you want to call it. Probably the youngsters go out, but most of us don't. And that has completely changed our perspective because we are mostly seeing the world through these social media more so than the actual world. So it is all packaged and given to us in different ways. So I took up this topic, acts of reading, because when I'm teaching my students at the various places I teach, I find that students are not able to read without support. We have to keep prompting them. We have to tell them, okay, this is the way you look at it. These are the ways in which you can read a text. And then when you tell them you give them a poem or a text to read and decode on their own. Not that they don't do it, but most of it is just the emotions that come out of them when they read a particular text. And that is not what reading is all about. It is not just emotions that are, as the new critics would say, the affective fallacy. They would say that the emotions which come out when you read a text are not important. Okay, so in that sense, it is not that it is not important. Our response to a text is very important, but we need to be tutored into reading it in multiple, through multiple perspectives or in different ways. And this particular topic, which I've taken, acts of reading, the different ways in which you can read. It's not a very comprehensive talk because of limitations of time. I cannot go into all the different aspects of reading, but mostly I'll be confining myself to fictional readings, readings of fiction, and mostly short stories, because those are, and maybe a couple of films here and there, because those are the texts which are easily readable and accessible. It doesn't take much time, and in this world of the internet and the social media, nobody has much time to go through a whole, a novel. And novel, when it originated in the 18th century and later on, it set itself in the 19th century, is essentially a kind of private, practice. Reading a novel is a private practice. So it comes with individualism. You become a private individual. Earlier, there was oral storytelling. You sit together as a community and you share stories orally. And that community aspect of it, the communal feeling which was part of storytelling, is no longer, was slightly set aside or marginalized when the novel came into being. And we all know, when we talk about the rise of the novel, that the novel was part of an 18th century enterprise which came with enlightenment and, considering the man as a rational human being and, a person. And then it came up with the rise of the middle class also, because the middle class had a lot of time, leisure time, because they had work in the house which was done by maids, or there is domestic support for them, and they have a lot of time on their hands, especially the women. That is how domestic fiction also came into, as a genre came. You cannot call Jane Austen's as a domestic fiction, not so Emily Bronte's, but Jane Austen. So all these are changes, the rise of the novel, the way in which we look at life through a novel. All this came up from the 19th century onwards, and reading has also become very different. It's become a very secluded kind of space where you sit alone with your book and read. So the earlier communal aspect of reading is no longer there. So coming to different acts of reading, I'm not talking about act of reading, but acts of reading. So I would like to quote Walter Benjamin. Walter Benjamin, in his book Illuminations, has an essay called The Storyteller. And there he talks about storytelling as a craft. Now you have to understand the difference between a craft and an art. There was this difference earlier. And even now there is, when you're talking about craft, you're talking about a skill. See, when you're writing your entrance examinations, it's a craft actually. I keep telling my students, don't worry if you don't clear the entrance exam. It's just a skill. You go on, drilling yourself, and then you get into that skill. So it is not about your IQ or anything. So in that sense, when you're talking about craft, it is a skill which can be learned. But generally, when you're talking about art, we talk about something divine about it, something which is very innovative. But at the same time, that aura has been lifted from the word art now, because we know that Walter Benjamin, in his essay, The Work of Art in the world of mechanical reproduction, it is called, and he has talked about art. He was talking about photography there, how photography has changed, how we are able to replicate instances in photography. And so photography has taken the aura out of art. Art was something very divine and something which is set aside and very exclusive. And in the age of photography, which can replicate art, as in painting or all that, it has taken off the aura. In the Frankfurt School of Criticism also talks about this, because he belongs to the Frankfurt School of Criticism, the Marxian Frankfurt School of Criticism. And they talk about how the aura, which was there, like a halo on art, was lifted when photography, etc., came into place. And now we know that the internet is in place, that aura is no longer there. We have so many nano stories. We have, instances of memes, which are also part of storytelling in a very satirical manner. So all this has taken the place of art as something very divine and something which is exclusive. So from there, when he talked about the storyteller, he talked about the storyteller as, he talked about the craft of storytelling as, he's talked about storytelling as a craft. That's what I want to put across. He talked about storytelling as a craft. Now, when he talks about storytelling as a craft, he's talking about the relationship of the storyteller to his material. What is the material? The material is human life. Okay? So it is a craftsman's relationship. So the storyteller, we talk about the artist or the storyteller, the writer, the author. Author's relationship to his material, which is human life, is a craftsman's relationship. And this storyteller fashions the raw material of experience, his own experience and others' experience. So, so there again, that aura is lifted. The storyteller becomes a craftsman. Now, just as the storyteller is a craftsman, the reader also is a craftsman. So even though the title is Acts of Reading, actually I should have put the word later on. I thought the craft of reading. It's a craft. It is a craft because it can be learned. And reading is always a rite of passage. Rite of passage meaning any significant event which changes you, or you transition from one particular stage to another is called a rite of passage. A marriage is a rite of passage. Death is a rite of passage. So all these are rites of passage. Even puberty, coming to puberty is a rite of passage. So reading also, in that sense, I would call it a rite of passage, in the sense that as you read, you are going to another stage. You mature. With each reading, you mature. And your ways of reading also changes as you move on. So coming back to the idea of the craft of reading, like any craft, it requires tools. Now, it's not like a tool which you can go and buy, like a hammer or a scissors or anything you want, a chisel. You can't go and buy it. This has to be acquired slowly through practice. Okay, so one of the main aspects of learning the craft of reading is understanding what kind of a text you are reading. I will come to the genre aspect later. So what is the kind of text you are reading is very important to understand. Now, briefly, a notion about the idea, something about the notion of taste. Now, taste meaning, in today's world, we no longer consider, we no longer make value judgments about texts. We no longer make value judgments. You don't say, okay, this is a good text, this is a bad text. All these are part of culture in which you live and can be studied to understand the culture in which you are living. And that is the sense in which, I would like to approach reading. So the notion of taste which has come into literature, you can think of Coleridge, who had traveled to Germany many times, and he came up with this, he was with German philosophers, and then he came up with this, you must have studied this, his Biographia Literaria, or part of it, where he talks about fancy and imagination. And fancy for him, when he's talking about taste, is a lesser kind of way of writing or responding to things. Fancy, because fancy just puts together concepts and images which are already in use. And then when you move on to imagination, it is, like I said, the art, the divine process, where you are very, like Shakespeare would have said, from air, I don't remember that quotation, my memory is very bad now. You come out of, make something out of nothing, or air, you create something. So that was the idea about art in earlier times. So the notion of taste was very much there. And this notion of taste comes into existence with modernism and new criticism. Modernism and new criticism also. Modernism is the most difficult. Modernist texts are the most difficult to read and understand because because of a number of reasons. Many of them, the influence of all those earlier texts that came up. You had Nietzsche, you had Darwin, you had Freud talking about the subconscious and the unconscious being as important as the consciousness. All this came into the idea of a modernist text. And modernist text looked at experimental ways of reading reality and writing about reality. So it's very difficult when you're talking about modernism, you're talking about impressionism, surrealism, cubism, Dadaism. You have all those isms which are modernisms, which you need to know and understand very well to be able to read those difficult texts. And we know famously how T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, you cannot read without, in a new critical manner, with just the text. You cannot read the text properly because it has a lot of allusions and references. It's very difficult to read that text in that sense. So new criticism, which we call close reading, looked at text in a very different way. They considered, something like the aura or the taste, which I talked about. They divided texts into two kinds: rhetorical texts and poetical texts. Poetical texts are the ones, you talk about as art, which is an aura, which is innovative, creative, divine, and all that. And rhetorical texts are texts which are for a kind of communication. Even poetry, he divides. Some of the poetry is denounced by the new critics because it's just rhetoric. Rhetoric is persuasive speech, churning up our emotions when you read it. So, in that sense, when you are dividing texts into rhetorical texts and poetical texts, we are confining poetry, or, they were talking about poetry, we are confining poetry to a very elite cultural ghetto. It is not accessible to all. So the author is not important, only the text is important, and the text and the words in the text, and you can read it through certain terms. They use these technical terms to help us understand through by way of which we understand or we can read a text, and those are irony, paradox, tension, tone, etc. And we also know how they talked about the fallacy called affective fallacy and also intentional fallacy, saying that the author's intention is not important. So the goal of a critic is not to reach the author, the intention of the author. That is not important, they say. And they also talked about affective fallacy, and affective fallacy is, what emotion is brought up in your mind when you read a particular text. That is also not very important. The emotion that is brought up in the reader's mind is not very important. So this is a text, and you make a close reading of the text. You look at how irony works there, paradox works there, tone, tension, and all that. Alan Tate talked about tension. Now, you also have this essay to study the PG students, paradox reading of paradox in certain texts. So when Clint Brooks is reading paradox in the text in Wordsworth's sonnet, lines composed on Westminster Bridge, I think. Exact title I don't remember. I mean, it is that poem. And he looks at London early in the morning, and then, London, which is a city, which is not part of nature, which is part of culture, in the early hours of morning, drenched in sunlight, drenched in sunlight, paradoxically becomes part of nature, part of the organicity of nature. And towards the end, there is a line where, he's talking about the city as sleeping. So the idea of sleeping itself shows that there is life to it, that it will wake up. So that is the way in which the paradox works. He talks about the paradox is working in that, the man-made city, the throbbing, the crowded city takes on an aspect of natural beauty in the early hours of morning and becomes part of the organic structure of nature. And even when in canonization, he was talking about, he was trying to read canonization as two ways of canonization. One is a proper meaning where the saint is canonized. There is the ancient Christian ritual where a person who is dead and gone, and their bodies are dredged up and then examined, and then there is a there is a kind of courtroom scene there where there is a devil's advocate on one side, and on the other side there is that is like in a court, the defendant and the other person. The other person is the devil's advocate, and there is an argument between them, just like in court, and then they finally decide whether this person should be canonized. So that is the idea of canonization. That is, you put a rubric saint along with the name of that person. Say Mother Teresa became Saint Teresa later on. Now, that canonization paradoxically is, becomes the canonization of the lovers. So that is a paradox that comes up in that. How does it become? They also renounce the world. Like the saint who has renounced the world to, engage in activities for mankind. So they also renounce the world, and they see the world in each other's eyes. He goes on to give different examples to show how you can talk about the lovers as also canonized. So these are the kinds of readings that new critics bring about in their in the ways in which they read a text. And that is also called close reading. And that is very confining. When you're talking about close reading, it is very, very confining. It is very important in today's, when you're doing cultural studies also, we talk about the culture as being very important. The culture is the site where the text happens. So that culture is very important. And Samuel Johnson has already told us long back when he was talking about the lives of, when he wrote a book called The Lives of Poets, how the lives of poets, the writers are very important, and what has happened in their life and what could have, led to them writing a particular text is very important. So you can't say the intention of the author is not important. Not in the sense of the intention of the author, but what happened in the lives of the author, because it is those things that is transmuted, what the experiences that they have in reality that is transmuted into their texts. Now there's another group who considers art as artifice, talks about poetical language as different from the other kind of language, and that is the group of you have Shklovsky to study, I think. They consider art as artifice, and the idea of art, or art is supposed to delay or prolong the experience of reading, because they defamiliarize ordinary things. Ordinary things. Wordsworth also spoke about making the familiar unfamiliar when he was talking about poetry. So defamiliarizing things, ordinary things around us which are put in a different way is what is called defamiliar. And putting it in a different way is art. And when you put it in a different way, you are trying to prolong the aesthetics, the pleasure that we derive when we read a particular text, which is a particular text. So the process of reading. Now coming to when you are looking at reading, you have to consider the world as a text. So I'm slowly coming to the postmodern way of looking at things, where you look at the world as a text, which was filled with signs, S-I-G-N-S. It is filled with signs. So our reality is a condition of textuality. I will explain to you what I mean by that. The human condition is a condition of textuality, is what I mean. Because everything that teaches us is through sign. Things around us come to us through signs, S-I-G-N-S. So we are surrounded by signs. We are living in a semiotic world, and these signs come to us in various ways. Now, every act of learning and reading is an interpretation of these signs around us. I'll explain it further. When you're reading something, when you're reading a culture, when you're reading a film, when you're reading an advertisement, when you're reading any text. So in that sense, everything is a text. Music is a text. A joke is a text. In that sense, everything is a text because it is comprised of signs, S-I-G-N-S. It has a number of signs, and we decode these signs because we are part of culture. We are able to decode these signs. So in that sense, we can say, we can agree with Shakespeare when he said all the world is a stage and we're all actors. The scripts have been given to us by culture. നമ്മളുടെ ഈ സ്ക്രിപ്റ്റ്സ് ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, നമ്മൾ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുന്നത് സ്ക്രിപ്റ്റ്സ് ആണ്, നമുക്ക് തന്നിട്ടുള്ള സ്ക്രിപ്റ്റ്സ് ആണ്. അതായത് these are scripts which are always there. I'll give you an example. Suppose there's a birthday party. So in that birthday party, you have a cake. That is again a textual sign that it is a birthday with happy birthday on it. Then you have all these decorations, you have the balloons and all that. You have people around. Sometimes they wear their caps and all that. And the birthday song, happy birthday song, is again a textual reality. So all this, because it's given to us by culture, we just enact these scripts. So when there is a birthday, we are enacting the script of birthday. Okay. Another example could be that, sometimes when people like us of our age talk as parents, we are sharing our experiences as parents. We talk about our children. And when we talk about our children and our relationships and what we spoke to our children, how they, responded to it, many of us feel the same things happen in their households also. It happens to everyone, the same things. The way in which the relationship between the mother, the father, the mother and the children are similar. Not completely the same, but are similar because these are all texts that have been given to us. And in that sense, when you are born, biologically also you're scripted, because your RNA and your DNA has already decided that your body is this. And that is why recently I have come across, a person in the extended families, two of them coming up with cancer, which is hereditary, because your genetic makeup is such that you're prone to certain types of cancer. So which means that your life is already scripted. So when you have your parents having a particular kind of cancer, it could be lifestyle illness cancer, but then certain cancers are said to be what is called genetic. So then it is a script which is given to us. So in that sense also, the DNA, the RNA and all that are scripts which are given to us. Then the linguistic and the cultural heritage, the language that is given to us, it is given to us. We use these words in language because it has been given to us by our culture. So there again, it is a text. And then all the rituals and the customs and practices, they're all given to us. They're all scripts which are given to us, and we follow them. But we might be making changes in these scripts, but then, it's already there. So when you're talking about our reality as scripted, then what do we understand about this concept of realism, which is a convention in literature? Literature uses a convention called realism, and modernism is totally different. Modernism was a reaction from realism. So when you're looking at realism, as something which comes from reality, and when the reality is already scripted, given to us, then what can we talk about realism? Realism is just a reenactment of things which are, already scripted to us, given to us. So all this which happens, so most of the things what I'm trying to say is that most of the things which happen to us are, as Barth would say, science of language. He calls it SCIENC, science of language. All scripts which are already given to us. He says scenes of language, not science of language. He talks about scenes, SCENES, scenes of language. So this he spoke when he was talking about in the essay Fragments of a Lover's Discourse. He was talking about lovers. And just like I told you about the birthday party, the lovers also, when two people love each other, they are following certain scripts. When you are giving an avowal that I love you, you're following a script because it's already given to you. This is what you say to the person who means the most to you in the world. You're saying, I love you. And then there is the will to possess. Then jealousy comes into the text. All this is scripted. So couples' reaction to special events, all this is scripted. So then again, when all this is scripted, you're talking about realism in literary works, which is nothing more than reading these scenes of language. So even when you're reading literature, you are reading these scenes of language. അതായത് ഓൾറെഡി നമുക്ക് തന്നിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ റീഡ് ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ളത്. അപ്പൊ ഈ തന്നിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ റീഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ you have to be a kind, as I told you, you have to be trained into it. So that's a sort of train, and that training you get when you read literature often. When you read literature and the criticism associated with literature, you are getting a training in that. That's why your syllabus has a number of literary texts which are supposed to be canonical works. Again, canonical works, canon is something which is something to do with power. A text becomes canonical because there's a power play in it. Certain texts are considered as canons and certain others are not considered as canons. So there's a lot of power play in the ways in which texts. So, and when you're reading literature, as I said about language is scripted, literature is also scripted. You talk about intertextuality. There are many things when you read, sometimes you get the feeling that, okay, this is something it has happened in another text which I read. This is a repeat of what I read in another text. So that sort of, sometimes there is a very obvious intertextuality. There is a reference to another text which has influenced this particular text. So that way also, when we are reading literature also goes through this process of, repeating what has gone on in earlier texts. So I think it should ring a bell for you, because when you're talking about T.S. Eliot's essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, this is what he's talking about, probably. Because tradition is as important, because tradition is part of your individual talent. The present is infused with the past. And he talks about the present as being influenced by the past and vice versa. this could be what he's talking about. So everything, so that is why when you keep on reading text, you find connections, you find links, you find patterns. And this helps you in your reading. Sometimes, there is a sense of deja vu. Deja vu is the feeling that something has already been seen, already happened. Oh, ഇതിന് മുന്നേ എൻ്റെ ലൈഫിൽ സംഭവിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്, അല്ലെ ഇതിന് മുന്നേ ഞാൻ ഇത് വായിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. A sense of deja vu. It's a French term which means already seen. That there is even a film called, in COVID times, I've been watching a lot of films, so I relate to films more now than. So there is a film called Deja Vu with Denzel Washington, acting in it, and how he finds the culprit who commits all these crimes through the sense of deja vu. He has a feeling that this is. There is another film called Copycat. Copycat is a film where the murderer copies certain earlier texts. There have been serial killers like what is it? Serial killer, the famous Jack the Ripper. So there are so many serial killers, and they're following these serial killers. This particular person who commits the crime is following serial killers, and then this researcher, a lady who is a researcher who has done a lot of research in crime. She's an academician, done a lot of these. She is brought in, and then she is able to figure out and anticipate the move of the criminal, of the murderer, what his next move will be by looking at the pattern, of earlier crimes. So he's following this particular earlier criminal, 1950s criminal. So this criminal, did this in the next, crime, and he could be following them. That is how they catch the criminal. So what I'm trying to say is that there are patterns which you can look into when you are reading. So again, Barth, I like to read Barth because Barth in mythologies is talking about myth in the sense of contemporary myth. We talk about the myths of coconut oil. Coconut oil is supposed to be good, supposed to be doing this, doing that. Coconut oil is bad. These are all myths. So myths are all cultural constructs, and there is a history behind it. So Barth, when in mythologies, a small text called Mythologies, he's taking up certain social texts, like a photograph or wrestling. Wrestling is a duel between good and evil. And so he's reading, he says, these are considered as natural, but they are not natural. They are part of myths which have been constructed historically. And he talks about the idea of red wine in French culture, how red wine became part of, which would embrace everyone. It becomes part of proletarian drink. It becomes something which is warm. Even in summer, it is cold and sparkling. And, the whole idea of creating an aura around the wine, red wine. This is again a myth that was constructed in history. So he gives a lot of examples when he talks about, these myths. What I'm trying to tell you is that, these are the different ways in which you can decode certain things which look like they are natural, need not be natural. They are culturally constructed. It's just the way in which femininity is also constructed. You talk about women as naturally not able to do many things. You look at politics. There aren't many women coming into politics, and the women can't. They're too emotional. They cannot make rational decisions. Is the kind of rationale that is given for not having women here, but the reasons could be different. But that is what these are all what are called constructs. Femininity, constructs. There are so many. So we are breaking out of those constructs. Feminism is helping us breaking out of those. So and we are busting all those myths also. Now, when we are reading a text, we look at very many different motives. MOTIFs. Now, what is a motive? A motive is a repeated symbol, you can see. Symbol is, everyone knows what a symbol. It stands for something else, something that's an object or an event, which stands for something else. But And it's played out just once. But a motive, is a symbol which keeps repeating. Then it becomes a motive. So when you're reading a text, one of the first things you have to look for is the motive, because the motive contributes to the development of the themes of the text. Now, I have taken texts which I don't know now, the BA syllabus has changed, but when I was teaching, there were short stories which were prescribed in your syllabus. So, one of the short stories which was prescribed was The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And when you're reading this text, the recurring motif in that text is one of transition, passing from one state to another. So let us take the house. Look at the house. The house where Usher is the name of the family. And I think it is Roderick Usher. And he has a sister named Madeline. And they're living in a house, and the setting is very important when you're reading a text, because sometimes it is through the setting that we are introduced into many themes which are there in the text. So when in this story, the setting gives us a house, a huge mansion. They belong to the upper class, a huge mansion which has a crack going from one part of the wall to the other, which shows the sign of decay. And decay is a mode of transition. You're moving from one particular state to another. When decay is a mode of transition. So the idea of things passing from one state to another is repeated in that story. So once you understand this, you look for Madeline. Madeline also, she was buried alive in the secret vault in the chamber. And there again, there's a transition from life to death, and then from, and vice versa. And then there is a crossing of boundaries also, which is a transition, because there is a hint of incestuous relationship between the brother and the sister. So that is also a kind of transgression, which is a kind of transition. So these motives are very important when you want to read a text. So you look for repeated symbols, and repeated symbols we call motives. It's very interesting to look at these repeated symbols. Look at barn burning. These are all texts which I taught, because I don't have to read them all over again. I have taught them many times. So I've taken these examples from text. So this is a short story by William Faulkner, Barn Burning. Now, burning is a motif there. Now, what does burning communicate? The theme of burning communicates, burning is of different kinds, the burning of the mind, the anger within the protagonist, and then the proper burning, the literal burning is also there. So this is a story about class struggle. So it's not racist, it's a class struggle. So because both are whites. And so this man, the main protagonist, he is given to, whenever he gets angry like the angry young men of that particular period. He gets angry at very small things. There is, when he gets angry, he goes out of control. He flies off his handle, so to speak. So one day he takes his son to this house, which is a white house, which is, spotlessly white. And it is a house of his boss. And he's a tenant farmer on his land. And he takes his son. And then as they're walking on the driveway, on the path leading to the house, the son notices how his father was horse dung on the path. And the son would have thought the father would, walk around it. But he puts his foot squarely in that dung, horse dung. And then, he carries that dung on the soles of his thing, and then he enters the house, and they enter. And, he makes a mess, and then the calling bell is pressed, and it is opened, and then he enters, and the carpet is also messed up with that. So this is his way of showing his resentment, So even it is burning, and this comes out of the way in which, his mind is boiling inside at the injustice of society. Okay. And towards the end, what he does, everywhere he goes, he keeps moving from one place to another, because he commits the crime of burning the barn. Barn is a place where you store your produce from your, cultivated crops and all that, the equipment, everything. So if you're burning the barn, then you're burning that year's produce. So his way of getting back. Now, this is another aspect of a theme when you're talking about different themes. Revenge as a motive is also. So the ways in which revenge is used as a motive. So in this particular text, the revenge is through the burning of the barn, because the barn contains all that year's produce, and that would be the best way of getting back or hitting back at the person who belongs to the upper class. So then there are motives like the quest motive. Now, the quest motive is a liberal humanist kind of enterprise, because the quest motive is all about a man or a boy in quest of his identity. Now, a very interesting writer who's no more, who was a Nobel Prize winner, Doris Lessing, has written Bildungsroman. No, quest is a motive in a genre called Bildungsroman. Now, that is another thing I have to tell you. When you're reading a text, you should identify the genre to which the text belongs. That helps you in reading it, in reading meaning into it. Because, for instance, in a text where everything is very realistic, in a very realism, the convention of realism is used, suddenly something fantastic happens. But there are, texts where magic realism happens in a realist convention. That is another device, magic realism, to help us understand. There are films like Forrest Gump, in which Tom Hanks, is talking about he's slightly retarded and his IQ is not that high, and he talks about meeting presidents of the United States and all that. So those are all, magic realist kind of forays into a world of fantasy. So the world of fantasy comes in certain realist texts, but generally, it is out of place in a text which uses the convention of realism. So to understand, suppose in a dystopic text, there is a text by Ray Bradbury which is called Fahrenheit something. Now, it is a very dystopic text. He looks into a future where, books are banned because books will, misguide the people. So all people are supposed to burn their books. And the story of how the books are burnt, and when how certain people, the protagonist, saves a few books, and then he tries to escape from the authorities because he has these books in hand, etc., etc. So when you're looking at this dystopic work, we are not looking at it as a realist text. So our reading is different. So we accept many things that happen there. For example, Animal Farm, written by George Orwell. It is an allegory. You have the animals talking and all that. So we read the text. We are not put off by that, because we know the genre is a genre of fantasy, because the animals are talking. So when you understand the genre, it helps you to reach meaning better, because the genre is very important to understand the meaning. So apart from that, the quest motive, I was talking about the Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman is a text which talks about the development of the main character from childhood to adulthood. It becomes a rite of passage and etc. There is also something called the Künstlerroman. You have Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, which are all Künstlerroman, because those are all novels about the development of the artist, how the person becomes an artist. But all these have what is called the quest motive. Now, the quest motive is something you can look for. And, if the genre is a Bildungsroman, you will be sure to see the quest motive. Now, what Doris Lessing did was, she found that the quest motive and the Bildungsroman had only male protagonists so far. They never had females. So she wrote a series of a text, it was a series called the Martha Quest novels. It comes one after the other. And these texts had Martha as the protagonist, the main character, not a male. And so that is a kind of subversion where she is, writing back at the empire called the liberal humanist empire, which talks about Bildungsroman as only text which can have the male protagonist. You also look for symbols. I told you motif can be a symbol, but symbols are, like when in Blake's poem Tiger, tiger is a symbol. What is it a symbol of? It is a symbol of power. Okay. It is also symbol becomes a metaphor also in Thought Fox, Ted Hughes' Thought Fox. The fox is a metaphor of what? Of the idea. Now the brain, the dark brain, which he's not cognizant of what is happening in the brain. He's sitting down to write a poem. He doesn't know what to write. Everything is very vague. It's like a dark forest. So there is this juxtaposition of the forest outside and the forest of the brain, which where the idea is not clear. And then and then there is a fox in the forest, and the fox here in the brain is the idea that is coming, shaping up. And then finally, the fox, the hot stinker fox, enters his brain, and the page is printed. So there again, you have the metaphor of the fox. So you look for, everyone knows that symbols and metaphors. So there is the river in Huckleberry Finn becomes a symbol, a metaphor for a lot of transitional things that are happening. The way in which it's a rite of passage actually. The Huck Finn is becoming more mature. He understands. He is part of the slavery culture, but then he understands Jim the slave as a person better, and the river becomes a passage of time and also a place where there is this rite of passage where he understands or he overcomes his perspective of what is slavery and how he is part of it. There is a Hemingway story called Hills Like White Elephants, which is a very interesting, because Hemingway has a very this technique called the iceberg technique, where a little part of most of the meaning is submerged and only a little of it is on the surface. So Hills Like White Elephants, there is it's very minimalistic, most of the stories. And Hills Like White Elephants, the husband and wife, they're sitting in a Spanish in the railway station of a Spanish town, and there is an argument going on between the husband and wife. I'm sorry, it's not the husband and wife; they are lovers. The argument going on between the lovers. Now the argument is that she's pregnant. She doesn't want to abort it. The guy wants to abort her to abort. So when this is happening, the argument is going on. She sees in the distance the hills. And for her, the hills look like white elephants. Now, white elephant, is something which, it takes a lot of effort and money to maintain a white elephant. So the white elephant, the unborn baby becomes a kind of white elephant, because the husband, the lover is putting it across as, an unwanted thing. And then when something is unwanted, it becomes a burden. And then the symbol of white elephant, where in I think it's Siam, white elephants were given as gifts to kings, etc. So it becomes a symbol of a kind of burden, and slowly the a very masculinist approach in many of his texts, so where the women succumb to what the male tells them. And that will be the end of their relationship also, even though nothing like that is said. Now, another text, there are a lot of, you can also look for patterns like biblical themes. When you're looking for biblical themes, you can talk about the Eden, the Garden of Eden, the serpent. Is somebody tempting a woman like an Eve? There is a flood, there is a parting of waters, there is a betrayal. If you have read Kite Runner, that is another text which is prescribed in the postgraduate syllabus. If you have read Kite Runner, you can read Kite Runner as a biblical theme of the betrayal of Abel by Cain and Abel story. It is a reworking of the Cain and Abel story, because they are brothers, half brothers, but they are brothers. Amir and Hassan. Amir and Hassan are half brothers. So when Amir betrays Hassan, it is a betrayal. It has a biblical implication of Cain, betraying his brother Abel, because of how God favors Abel rather than Cain, and so he gets angry. So there is a reworking of biblical themes there. Now, Araby another story which is prescribed for the degree classes. Araby is a story by James Joyce, where again it is a rite of passage where this child moves from innocence to experience, and this boy falls in love with his friend's sister, and then then finally towards the end of the story, his obsession with that girl is he gets over he overcomes the obsession with that girl. So that is called the fall from innocence. So earlier it was innocently he was attracted to the girl, and he wanted to have her as his girlfriend, etc. But then going to this bazaar, there is a change of mind, and then a change of perspective because of a certain reason, and there is a fall from innocence. So that is again, you can consider it as a biblical theme. The fatted calf, again, and Toni Morrison's Beloved, yes, Beloved, the Toni Morrison kills Beloved before because she sees these horsemen. These horsemen are the white men coming on horseback. It signifies biblically doom, the last day of judgment, and feeling that she rather than expose her children to the violence of these white racist men, she would rather kill, but she can kill only one child. So that again could be a reworking of the biblical theme. Fairy tales. There is a very interesting fairy tale by reworking of the fairy tale by Angela Carter. It's very famous, Bloody Chamber. And Bloody Chamber is a reworking of many fairy tales. You can't say one particular fairy tale, but the pattern, the formulaic pattern that happens in fairy tales is seen here. So there you have this usual romantic tale of this girl, this guy who's very rich, he has a castle, he belongs to he's one of the richest in France, and he falls in love with a simple middle class, or working class girl who was playing a piano in a restaurant, and he falls in love with her. She's only 17. He has married thrice already, and all his previous wives were dead. And then how he gets engaged to her, marries her, and her mother is a very strong woman because she has been through a lot during the war, and she is presented as a very strong, very a woman with agency. And when she gets married and goes to the castle, everything is there. All the riches are at her. Even the taps are golden. And when she reaches there, after some time, he tells her, he gives her a bunch of keys and says, do not open this one key. Out of all the keys in that bunch, some of them, to his drawer, to the files, to the ornaments that his family possesses. And then he talks about one particular key that you should not open. This particular key is to a room which you should not open. Naturally, like Eve, she was tempted when, it was not serpent who tempted her, but women have always been designated as a temptress by patriarchy. So she's tempted to open that door, and she sees it is a bloody chamber where, she finds the bodies of 3 previous wives. There's a lot of blood. It is a torture chamber. You understand? So now this is, if you can look at a myth called the Pandora's box. You can relate it to that myth. God gave Pandora a box and said, Greek myth, please do not open this box because, if you open, something drastic will happen. And Pandora, as usual, it is a reworking of that, you can say. And Pandora, being a woman, can't, contain her curiosity, and she opens it, and then all the evils of the world is let out because God has, Ava isn't only the evils of it, and it goes out, and it creates trouble. So this is a reworking of that Pandora myth, maybe, probably. And she enters a bloody chamber, and she sees this, and she becomes very scared. By the time her husband had gone somewhere, and he would be coming back, and she plans to escape from there because she knows her fate will also be the same, etc., etc. And then towards the end, she's trying to escape with the help of a piano tuner who's part of the entourage of the servants in the family, and he's a young boy, and he helps her helps her to escape. But the husband by the time comes back, and when he sees that, actually, it was like a temptation he put in front of her so that she would open that chamber. And so he comes back, and then he plans to kill her. So how will she be killed? Not tortured in that chamber. Her head will be cut off, he said. And he is all ready in the courtyard to cut off her head. And it is at that point of time that somebody comes on horseback. The hooves of the horse is heard, and it is her mother. Because in the midst of all this, she had telephoned her mother, and she cried a lot. Why are you crying? Mother asked. I don't know, because I'm overwhelmed by everything here. Even the taps are golden color, she says. And the mother, being the mother, senses that something is wrong. And so she immediately, there's a number of hours pass between that and the time, and it is a mother coming to the rescue. So you have a subversion of the usual fairy tale where it is a man who rescues Sleeping Beauty, or it is always a male who comes to the rescue, but here is a woman coming to the rescue. So this is a subversive reworking of the patriarchal, fairy tale. Then there is Mahashita Devi's Draupadi, again a reworking where the woman Draupadi is a character from the epic Mahabharata, and we know about how she's divested of her clothes and Krishna comes to her rescue. But this particular Draupadi she's Dopti actually, and she belongs to a tribe, West Bengal. The setting is that of the Naxalbari movement in Kolkata at that time in the 1970s. And she and her husband are engaged in, they're not allowed to touch water and all that. So she, and very rebelliously, they take water from the wells, and she's punished for it. The army chief there tells his officers to, teach her a lesson by raping her, and she's raped many times. And after raping her, the officers tell her to cover herself up. And what does she do? Very subversively, she refuses to cover herself up. She exposes her body. This is her way of reclaiming her body. She exposes her body. She doesn't cover herself up, and she shows resistance to patriarchy by doing that. And they become very flustered, and they run away because they can't imagine a man. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy that you related it to a movie. I haven't read the whole text. Yes, so there are so many. So these are patterns you come across when you're reading, and when you do a lot of reading and watching movies, all this comes to the fore. There is a motif of flight also. Take A Garden Party by Catherine Mansfield. There's a motif of flight there. You find Laura, the main protagonist, there flying. When her mother tells her to do something, she's flying from one place to the other, flitting. Lot of images related to flying, etc. Now there are a lot of stereotypes. A death happens. It is a rite of passage. It is a story which shows the maturity, how this little girl, a 17-year-old girl, matures during the process of the garden party. There is a death down. They belong to her family belongs to a very rich family. They're having a garden party, and the extravaganza where they have a marquee set up. They have different the food items of food and all that. And in the midst of all this, when all this is going on, decoration, lots of flowers which are so exotic, it costs a bomb. All this is brought in, and you feel, what an excess, there is an excess of everything, excess of food, excess of decorations, flowers, there is a band playing, and all these are all like butterflies. Her sister Jo's is described as a butterfly. So everywhere you find these motives of flight. And later, for Laura, the main protagonist, the flight becomes a flight from innocence to experience, when there is news of a death in the workers' colony down there, because they live on a hill. Geographically also they are upper class, and topographically they are on a higher plane, and they are class-wise also they belong to the upper class. And then down the hill there, as you cross the road, there is a colony of working class people, and one man in one of the houses there has died, and then Laura wants the party to be stopped because she hears about the death, and her mother. So I don't want to go into all that because I don't. Arya, how much more time do I have?
Miss, you can continue.
Okay.
Then we have an interaction section too.
Okay. So then she goes down and she crosses the road. Now it is like crossing the boundary from one class to the other. She crosses. Now why does she go there? Because she feels very guilty, and because she feels guilty, her mother says, "Okay, then you do one thing. These are the leftovers from the party. So much of food remaining. Why don't you take it to the house, to that place? Show them." So there's a kind of condescending attitude. They are giving the remains of the feast. And that reminds me of another story, Remains of the Feast by Geeta Hariharan, which is a very interesting story. And the remains of the feast is taken by her. She takes it in a basket and goes there. And her experience of going there, and so there is a light symbolism also there. Because earlier, everything is described as bright, sunny, blue sky, and all that. And by the time she goes there, it becomes somber, dark, shadows, dog crossing, etc., etc. And then she goes to the house of the deceased, and she doesn't know what to do because it's the first time she's going to this place, and she feels very awkward because she's wearing her, her party dress and the hat which her mom has given her. She feels very awkward, and then she looks at she's taken to see the dead body, and then she sees that the man is very peacefully sleeping, not dead. So she considers that man as happy, peaceful, and at rest. And what has that got to do with my party and my house? She thinks, and that is how she overcomes the feeling of guilt, and then she leaves that place. But at the same time, it is a movement, a rite of passage from innocence to experience, where she has an understanding how. Earlier, also, she was a much more intelligent girl, a much more sensitive to, the divide between the working class and the upper class and all that. But towards the end, there is a resolution where she thinks, okay, I mean, it has nothing to do with us, our family, and the party, and that is how the story ends. Now, talking about Remains of Geeta Hariharan had written a a short story called Remains of the Feast. Now, this is a very interesting story where the girl who is just girl in the sense, she's nearly 20 or something. She's got admission for MBBS. She'll be starting her studies, medical studies soon. She lives in an ancestral house. Her great grandmother's living with her along with her parents. Her grandparents have died, meaning this grandmother's children have died. And she's 90. A few weeks before her 90th birthday, this grandmother, completely changes. Her attitude changes. She tells, I don't remember her name. She tells this girl, her great granddaughter, it is a Brahmin household. She becomes kind of a revolutionary because she's a widow. Her head is tonsured. She's wearing dull colored clothes. And this is her way of resisting the way patriarchy, confines them to a world without color when they are widows. So she breaks out of it very subversively. She tells her great granddaughter and makes her bring a lot of food items prepared by non-Brahmins, containing non-vegetarian stuff and all that. She gorges and gorges. She goes on eating and eating and eating. And she wants Coke and Coca-Cola and all that. So this is a kind of, this shows a kind of resistance to, even though late in the day, she's nearly 90, but she's suffering from thyroid cancer, and she passes away. And it is after her passing away that looking back, this girl thinks about her. And she was insistent that after she dies, she has to be dressed in red sari with, all makeup and all that. So this is a text which shows how women subversively, how women show their agency in different ways to resist patriarchy. Now, there are Christ figures. So I'll come to, how many of you have seen the movie Home? Home. It's come on Prime recently. I hope quite a few of you have watched that movie, because there is a Christ-like figure. You have studied your Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway's. Now, Santiago, there is a Christ figure. He goes through a lot of suffering at sea. He's crucified. He's self-sacrificing. He's a forgiving person, etc. Now, when you watch the movie, I hope some of you at least have watched the movie Home. Now, Home is a movie which is for these times. It has a cultural context of all these OTT on the movies which come up on the OTT platforms are all movies which look at things in a different way. So in a technologically driven world, this particular man, Indran Sanale, this particular man, what happens in this family of Indran's, his wife, his two boys, children, and the father, and Indran's father, meaning the grandfather of the two sons. So it is a family of 5, the grandfather. So there is a symbol there. At the beginning of the movie, they show an aquarium, a fish, moving about in the aquarium. And this grandfather is sitting next to the aquarium. And he's watching the aquarium wall. Now he's a man who has incontinence. He cannot, he has no control over his bladder, and so he urinates. And there is the son, Indran's, comes and cleans up, and then he shouts at him, but then he comes back and apologizes. So Indran's is, when you watch the movie, you feel that he's a kind of Christ figure, or the kind of person who is described in the Bible as exemplary, who will turn the other cheek. If you give a slap on one cheek, the other cheek is shown, that sort of a person. Now he's very technologically challenged, and he's unable to, and you find in that family, as we are shown how the family lives in that house. They are dependent on the elder son. The elder son is an architect, and that is how they have this beautiful house he constructed. The father, Indran's, doesn't have anything much. He used to have a video shop. Video shop has gone out of, it has become obsolete. Video shops are no longer there, become obsolete. And so he doesn't have a job. So they are all living off this elder boy, who's an architect, but then he switches over and becomes a successful director and script writer. One movie is released and he makes money, and he's trying to write a second script for a second movie, and that doesn't happen. So this goes on, and then you find the typical mother, but there again the mother is not the angel in the house, which Virginia Woolf describes as the feminine trope of women in those times. She's not the angel in the house. She does all the work, but she keeps on cribbing. There is a kind of resonance for me when I see such movies. That the same thing happens in my house also. I keep on complaining. I do all the work and I keep on complaining. And but earlier times the women are silent, just like the silent wife of the mayor of Casterbridge, just like that, self-sacrifice. So we women are not self-sacrificing, but we keep on cribbing and complaining. So that is what you find in that lady also. And so a lot of things. And then the aquarium breaks. So these are all symbols, the aquarium, which has it is decayed on the underside, and we are shown slowly one scene after the other how, there is a small crack forming. Anytime it might break and all that. So that could be related to the father. It's very symbolic of the life that the father, meaning the grandfather of the sons, is living in the house. Silent, like a caged bird, not able to. Now, Indran's name is Oliver Twist. Now, how did he get the name Oliver Twist? Because his father used to have books, bookshops, and he used to have all these English books also. So he is given the name of Oliver Twist, which is very interesting. And now Indran's is very technologically challenged, and you find, the kids don't have much time for the father. You find him like a Christ figure. He's always obliging others. He's always, asking for forgiveness because he has done something wrong, because he has disturbed them, almost like a Christ figure. And then as the movie goes on, you are told about the elder son, in love with a woman, and they belong to a slightly upper class. So there is a comparison of that girl's father and Oliver Twist, because Oliver Twist has not made a mark in his life. So his sons do not have, especially the elder son, considers him to be a nothing, a nobody. And he is all praised for his girlfriend's father, etc. Now the girlfriend's father has written a book, an autobiography, and on that autobiography, the front page of it is a painting done by his mother, meaning that his girlfriend, this boy's girlfriend's father has written a book, and the father's mother used to be a painter, and she paints, and so she is the one who has illustrated the front page of that book. And then when the Satyendra Prakashana nadakkunnu, it is at that point of time that there is a story which he keeps on telling. He wants his son, his elder son, to accept him, give respect to him. So he tells him about what he has done, because the elder son compares him with his father-in-law to be. So he says, I have done something great in my life. And so the son says, what? And then he narrates the story of how when he was a young boy, he and his friend rescued or helped a woman who was pregnant, and they were living in a far off place. You have to cross a river to reach a hospital, and it was night time. The woman comes for help, and he was the one who somehow, if you see the movie, you'll understand. I don't want to go into all the details. He helps them, he helps that woman reach the hospital. So this is the feat that he has done, very brave thing that he has done, which he keeps repeating to everyone, but nobody, cares about it. Now there is a small Deus ex machina, it is called. Deus ex machina, or Deus machina, M-A-C-H-I-N. Deus ex machina sometimes used to resolve a storyline. അതിന്റെ ഒരു completionലേക്ക് എത്താൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഈ ഒരു. So who comes as a Deus ex machina? This KPSC Lalita, who is the mother of this man who has written the book, the one who has painted the front. And then it comes about that this incident that he's talking about, that is why he calls it a god in a machine. Deus ex machina means god in a machine. Coincidence. And it comes about that KPSC Lalita is a woman that he rescued. I mean, he helped out, and the son that she gave birth to is this man who's going to be the father-in-law of the son. So I thought when I saw the movie, that's a very far-fetched thing to happen. But then these are all different ways in which a narrative works to kind of bring sometimes resolution, sometimes for comic relief, etc. So Deus ex machina is something which happens in text also. You can read it like in that manner. And that is how the story ends with due respect and status given to this Christ-like figure who was considered inferior and kind of person whom nobody wanted, etc. So I think I'll stop with that, because if I go on, it's already nearly 12 o'clock. So these are the ways in which, but when you're reading a story, you can read it according to the genre to which it belongs, and then also there are different ways you can look at the plot. I didn't go into all that because those are things which you learn in your class. Fiction is a movement. It moves from one position to another. There is a dynamics in fiction. What are the changes? You have to look for all the changes that comes about in the book, in the text. How it starts and how it ends. So the ending is also very important. So what is the change process that happened? How does the plot change? So look at the beginnings and the ends and register the change. Then you have to isolate the central character and all the changes that are brought about in the central character. Then what are the things that works against the movement of the story? Then also a note about minor characters who seem to be not important, but thematically they might be important. There are many like that. So these are all things you look for when you are reading a text. So if it is a realist story, if it is a romantic story, if it is a fantasy, if it is a science fiction, detective fiction, they're all formulaic. You know what is going to happen. I mean, you won't know who committed the crime, but there is a formula for. There is an interesting movie called Knives Out, Knives, Knives Out, which is a reworking of the Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie, the way in which Agatha Christie presented her crime fiction. The way in which Hercule Poirot, the investigator, just like Sherlock Holmes, he his style, it is almost a Hercule Poirot like figure in that, and how he solves the crime. So these are all formulaic. So look at the genre which you're reading, and then sometimes you'll have a formula in your mind, because if it is a romance and if it ends happily, it will help you to read the text that way. The genre also helps you to come to the meaning of the text. I don't know if I have been too fast. I wanted to cram so many things because it is too many things in a brief period of time. So I will now give space to you if you want to ask anything about what I have spoken. I hope I have, I have kind of reached out to you, because I have spoken fast also, because it's a vast topic, and I just wanted to, just show you about slightly here and there, different ways about reading, and from there you can take off in your reading. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was such an interesting session. And thank you for showering us with your knowledge and provoking our thoughts. So, with that, we go ahead and move on to the interactive session. The participants are free to ask questions, share your ideas and opinions with the resource person. Ma'am, actually, we already have a question for you in the chat box. I can read it for you.
Yeah.
The question is from Keshav Bansal. The question is,
Yeah.
how
Okay, I saw something there, but I didn't read. Okay.
yes, ma'am, I can read it for
Even
you.
Maleficent starring Angelina Jolie is a subversive reworking of the fairy tale genre. Very good. I like that because I haven't watched that movie. So probably I will do it soon. So thank you so much, Keshav Bansal. So do you want to talk about it? It's good that you're connecting. That's what we need when we are talking to students.
Actually, there is a question about that. If I
Yeah.
read it. So my question concerns digital humanities. How do you look at implications of digital humanities on acts of reading? I ask this question in relation to computational methods to literary data for the purposes of literary history and theory, including macro analysis, cultural analytics, computational formalism, computational literary studies, quantitative literary studies, and algorithmic literary criticism. Also, I wonder about possibilities of post-human consideration with the rise of AI and other forms of, electronic literature and literature
Yeah.
that is not primarily produced by humans or for humans, for that matter.
I know, but I'm totally at a loss with all this technology. So you can contribute, how it would, because, AI is something I'm so fascinated about. I don't know anything about it. So I think you could, help us with that, because computational analysis and all that is totally off my.
So, actually, I recently saw this documentary on Al Jazeera about this new AI software, with which they are, reworking unfinished works of, great artists like Beethoven. So there was a unfinished symphony of Beethoven that was completed using AI. Also, there is a painting of Rambardon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, a Russian or European painter whose unfinished or damaged painting was again made by AI. Similarly, a text by a German author. I can't remember the name of the author, but the text is "A Man Without Qualities." It's an unfinished novel, and they are completing it with the use of AI. So that kind of implications I'm
Yeah,
talking
those
about.
are very interesting. Yeah, those are very interesting things. But artificial intelligence is always a programmed kind of thing, right? So I don't know the possibilities that could, because they are again, looking at patterns of the text which is unfinished and then trying to find an ending to it. So it could be a stereotyped, ending. I don't know. I'm not very sure, but it's a very interesting possibility, for literature also, to have artificial intelligence coming in and taking over a human text and completing it. That sounds very interesting. But I don't know how far, unless we read that text, how it will work out. But yes. In today's world, anything is possible. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Are there any more? Harsha.
Hello, ma'am. So
Yeah.
happy to listen to you again. Yeah,
Yeah.
you talked about deja vu, and I'm actually feeling that right now. Yeah, it feels like I'm back in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just taking off from where the previous responder talked about, I was recently, I saw my brother actually, playing a video game on his PlayStation. I don't know what the game is called, but it is set somewhere in the 14th century during the plague,
Okay.
the black. So when I saw that, I had this, sudden, connection to what we studied with Chaucer and all that. Yeah. So talking about video games, these video games are actually, and when I watch it, I don't know how to play it, but when I watch it, I understand that they have a proper storyline, and
Yes.
it makes, I mean, the participant or the player actually participates in the story. So that is a very interesting kind of thing reading, and it also kind of reminds me of Italo Calvino's, If on a Winter's Night, a
Interesting.
traveler.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's exactly not a question, but I was just,
Observation.
connecting,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very interesting.
observation. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't have any clue about these games, but I've seen that they take narratives from history and they rework it in the form of a game. And this participation, we would like the author, we in the sense the author would like the readers to participate in his, but that is not possible in a literary text where you are sitting alone in a book, I mean in a room and reading the text. But this throws up a lot of possibilities. This kind of intervention that can happen between the reader, the response of the reader, and how it could even change the story the author is making. The author could even change the story according to the response of the reader. So those are all, when you look at those games, such things could happen also in the world of literature, uh, uh, online. You know. Thank you, Harsha.
Yeah. Thank you.
No more questions. People are feeling hungry, Arya.
Any more questions? The participants are free to leave their questions in the chat box in case of any technical difficulties. I can read it to the resource person.
I think they're still chewing on what was said. So probably it'll take some time for the questions to come. Most of the text I took about things they have already learned or read because I wanted them to connect with what I was saying.
Any more questions?
Adding,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, please.
yeah. So in this movie, I mean, characters are pulled into a game where storyline is constantly changing, and human characters are transported to a gaming world where they are participating in the game story, which is not your original game story. It keeps on changing due to some glitch or something. But that's also an interesting thing that they have done with the movie, where a storyline is adapted in a gaming framework, just as Harsha talked about before me.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of put these movies out there. I mean, this is something interesting that I found.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very interesting responses. Maybe I could look into that because those are things which are way out of my league.
Any more questions? More questions are welcomed. I think that's the end of the question answer session. Thank you, everyone. Now I call upon Arya Manoj from 3rd BA English for delivering the vote of thanks.
Here we had a webinar, LITmus Talks, which is a new initiative of our department in association with the Indian Quality Assurance Cell of College, which conducts a series of lectures titled LITmus Talks, which was inaugurated by the inaugural talk of Sri Sajay KV as the resource person. For the second talk, we were honored to have former head of department, Dr. Anitha Ramesh K as a resource person speaking on the topic Acts of Reading a Brief Sketch. This was just the second session of our LITmus talks. There is way more to go. Litmus paper changes its color depending on a solution it is put into. Literature is a litmus paper that can make us think and can change our lives. First and foremost, I extend a hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Dr. Anitha Ramesh K, a well-known academician with more than 30 years of experience and expertise. She was the former HOD of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College and is now working as a faculty in Malabar Christian College. She has presented several papers in various national and international seminars and had published a number of articles in several research journals which are a true reflection of her wealth of knowledge. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing time from your busiest schedule to be the resource person for today's talk. We are grateful to you, ma'am, for giving us this opportunity to hear your insightful talk on craft of reading by considering the text and genres of text and so on, and this will surely be going to encourage us in our future events. I would like to thank Principal of Zamorin's Guruvayurappan College and former HOD of the English Department, Dr. Rajani B, for her support, vision and commitment. Her able guidance has always encouraged us. Thank you, ma'am. Next, let me thank HOD of English Department, Dr. Rekha K, who is a great scholar, reader, and who has dedicated herself to contribute her best efforts. Next, let me thank anchors Kavya R and Agila Subramanian of PG first year, who handled the meeting in the best possible way. Next, let me thank all the teachers who are present here, whose efforts needs no introduction and speaks itself to results. And finally, but importantly, let me thank all students and other members who had gathered here and made this webinar a grand success. As said by C.S. Lewis, literature adds to reality. It does not simply describe it. It enriches the necessary competencies that daily life requires and provides. And in this respect, it irrigates the deserts that our life has already become. And I believe that this small talk have helped you to irrigate your deserts. Once again, thank you for your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Arya. We come to the end of the second session of the webinar series. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Anitha ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.